Continuing in a series of good news for Florida State on the offensive side of the football, alongside Gene Williams, the founder and administrator of Warchant.com. My name is Tom Lang, and today we're talking about the rushing game, and a lot of good things happened for FSU on the ground in 2022. Make sure everybody to hit the like button, subscribe to Warchant TV for great content like this, and we're going to get straight into it, Gene. 2021 was a year for the rushing offense for FSU that was productive in explosiveness, but we were looking for greater consistency. Well, Florida State got better across the board in 2022, and you did a deep dive in the basic stats, the old school stats, and then also the PFF grades as well. Talk to us about what you saw comparing 2021's offense, 2022 on the ground in the rushing game.
Yeah, we did that. Like you mentioned, we did the overall breakdown, looking at on all the offensive numbers were through the roof. Seriously, we talked, quarterback, obviously we talked about that in the last thing, how good Jordan Travis was, but really I wanted to then go to the next segment. That was obviously the running game. And just like the passing game, it made leaps and bounds improvements to this past year. As you can see there, I mean, every single metric you look at, I mean, it's really high across the boards. And, some of the things that jumped out to me, and it may not be significant to a lot of people. They think, well, you improve your yards per carry, but to improve it by 2/3 of a yard, that's significant. That's a lot of yards that you're getting in there. So to me, that jumped out to, and, more explosive runs, more runs at 15 plus yards. You had 22 more. Well, that's almost 2 more big runs a game you had. And again, that in the context of a game, that a big run or two can be the difference between a win and a loss in a close game. So to me, that was significant. But I will say the one that jumped out to me the most, Tom, we're going to talk about it when we get to the individual players, is this PFF metric called missed tackles force that they have on there.
Yeah.
And from them to more than double that number, I mean, that's just, you look at any other team, that just doesn't happen. That is huge. And it's going to be interesting when the individual ones, we'll see which player was primarily responsible for that. I don't think that's going to be a big surprise. But, all these add up, and we look at the end, PFF grades, gives the segment a grade. We compared that to 2022. And, this is a Mike Norvell team that loves to run the football. For his offense to be effective, they've got to be able to run the football, which they were okay, a little average, a little below average in 2021 doing it with that rank of 77. And then to jump all the way to in the top 10 with a score of over 92 this past season tells you they've improved by leaps and bounds. And credit to the offensive line, credit to the running backs, and also the coaching staff for coming up with more ways to put these guys in position to be successful.
Gene, I got to tell you, 2 years ago, we were enamored with the ability to create explosive runs of longer than 15 yards. And Florida State hit a lot of home runs. Jashaun Corbin was leading the way there, just guys who could, it's your own 20-yard line. It's 7-3 ball game. Next thing you know, it's 10-3 Florida State. And you're thinking, wow, without a great offensive line, how do you scheme it up to get those explosive plays? I didn't know that they could improve in that regard as much as they did. I mean, I'll pull it up one more time.
Yeah.
But look at that, 22 more runs in the explosive category. I thought, Gene, before the season started, they'd be better on the offensive line, and you'd see an increase in the yards per carry on second down and third down because of greater success in traditional runs, those 3 and 4 yard gainers rather than loss of 1 or loss of 2. I didn't know they could do both. PFF breaks down more of the advanced looks. They use the film, advanced looks of the running game. What did you see there from individual players that comprise these totals that we're talking about?
Yeah, obviously we know it's gonna start with Trey Benson, and what an addition he was. And I remember, Tom, you and I watching that spring game. We did the in-game watch along the spring game, and he had a couple runs. And I remember there was one, and I said, "That's my guy." He made one. He made a guy miss in the backfield. Then he showed the speed, and then he lowered the shoulder, got extra yards. So he showed every aspect of an elite running back in my mind. Then, even though he really had effectively really not done anything at the college level. Right now, you start looking at those numbers, and they just, they're really impressive. 10 yards short of being a 1,000-yard rusher, despite not having a ton of carries. I mean, that's the thing. You're averaging 6.5 yards per rush, and that's really impressive. It goes back to a few things. We talked about those forced missed tackles, and 79 of those were from him. Now, to put that in perspective, I went and looked on the number of carries PFF does and all this stuff. They don't break it down by missed tackle per carry. At least I didn't see that metric in there. But he had 79. Number 1 was Bijan Robinson, but he had almost 100 more carries this past season than Trey Benson did. So on a per carry basis, he was by far number one. We're going to talk about that metric too in a little bit, Tom. I don't want to jump ahead to that. The elusive rating, that's something else I
Yeah.
want to talk about there too, because that really shows how elite he is. But, you got to look at, Trayshawn Ward transferred, unfortunately, but I mean, what a great season he had. That bowl game was something special.
Yep.
And, even some of the other guys, you saw a big improvement, I thought, from Lawrance Toafili. I thought last year maybe the kid had lost it. He looked so rough at the end of last year, but man, he really picked his game up. He was the best running back in terms of catching the ball in the backfield. So I think that gives you another element in Mike Norvell's offense. And, we've got some glimpses there of Rodney Hill too. And I think a guy that might get, I know you guys talked about it with D-Rob during the in-game show, and he was all about him. And you could see the glimpses that he's a very special running back. So he's back. I think we're going to see a lot more of him this year too.
Yeah, I hope so. I'm on Team Rodney Hill. I have been since the first time I saw him in spring camp. That was different. It just, he's going to develop his body a little bit more, but he's got those instincts and the short area quickness that I think is going to be very productive in this offense. But Gene, Trey Benson didn't just jump out in the spring game. I know it was Duquesne and it was week 1, but I believe he had 10 or 11 missed tackles forced in just one game. The interesting part about that, though, is from the Duquesne game for the next month and a half, Trey Benson wasn't the starting running back. He wasn't your number one guy. It seems kind of funny to think about that now that the season's over. But Trayshawn Ward was bona fide number one before he got dinged up. He was the starter. And then when he went down with injury, Trayshawn Ward did, Benson took over, and he never looked back.
Yeah, it is something to look at that. I do want to talk about his elusive rating because that's a PFF proprietary stat that they have. And I was talking to an NFL scout about this, and that's one of the things they kind of look at. That's something that they rate pretty highly. And to put that in perspective, the number 2 running back, at least if you a guy who had over 150 carries in the Power 5, was Bijan Robinson in this category. And guess what? He's probably going to be the number 1 running back taken in the draft coming up here real soon. So he puts it in that category. And I really think Benson would have been heading the fact that this was effectively his first season. Like you said, he didn't even start the whole season. And he did nothing. He came off a major injury, so he really did nothing before at Oregon. If not for that, then he might be the number 1 running back or the top 2 or 3 running back in this draft. And I think that's one of the reasons why he came back. Of course, battles and NIL probably contributed to that as well. But, the fact that Florida State has an NFL caliber running back there, and he's only really played college football for 1 year, how much better could he get? And Tom, you alluded to that earlier. The one thing, when we look at this, and we saw it against Florida and Oklahoma and Clemson and some of these teams with a really stout defensive line, this offensive line was, I think you could say they were average. Is that fair to say? This last season, they were average. With some of the additions, with another year of coaching under Alex Atkins and some of these guys that were starting and playing a lot to get bigger and stronger with Josh Storms for another year, what if FSU had an above average offensive line, which is very possible this year? What does that do for this running game? We talked about all the metrics. The one that's still, look, short yardage situations against a good defense, they had to be creative to be able to pick those up. They couldn't just smash mouth between the tackles. If they can add that element to this offense, I'm going to be just shocked at what this running game could do in 2023.
Spring practice begins on Monday, March the 6th, and we got to pinch ourselves around here. It's still kind of new, Gene. We're breaking down not only a very good college football offense, an elite offense in the game of college football. That's what we'll be doing between now and spring camp begins March 6th. Make sure to subscribe to WarchantTV. Hit the bell to be alerted anytime we go live and bring you new content. You will be as prepared as you've ever been for a Florida State spring camp after what we do in the next month. We hope you join us here at WarchantTV for the ride. For the founder and administrator, Gene Williams, who's telling you to like this video, my name is Tom Lang. Hope you enjoy it. We'll continue this series. We'll continue breaking down what should be an incredible 2023 for the FSU football offense and its program.